Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up,
the councils that we work with recognise the role that they have in enabling communities to be in the driving seat of change where it is possible for them to do that.
How can crowdfunding be the boost that community projects need to get off the ground? We speak to the CEO of a platform which has been helping community-focused projects to flourish in the UK and Ireland, to hear how crowdfunding can aid in building better neighbourhoods. We also look at how airport terminals can deliver a more personalised retail experience as we talk to the team behind the upcoming new Terminal 1 at New York's JFK. And we pop by one of the biggest folk festivals in Switzerland too. That's all ahead in the next 30 minutes, right here on The Urbanist with me, Andrew Tuck. Securing funding for community projects can be a difficult road to travel, especially for those unfamiliar with the process. This can often delay or prevent projects that are desperately needed from getting off the ground. While local councils' remit should be to identify and prioritise the needs of the community, sometimes these needs can be tough for them to deliver. Enter Spacehive, a crowdfunding platform for community projects in the UK and Ireland, whose goal is to invest in local people and support their ideas and reinvigorate places. Well, to answer some of the key questions about this process, I'm now joined by Spacehive CEO Misha Danak. Misha, thank you for joining us. Perhaps we can start with the basics. How do you describe exactly what it is that Spacehive does?
Spacehive is a fundraising platform that's dedicated to community projects. So in the last decade or so, we've raised just under £40 million for community projects. And they are projects that are solely led by communities, and they're all driving urban change and transformation and tackling really specific local issues. And those issues range, or rather those solutions range from things like new street markets, spruced up playgrounds, reimagined, rewilded new areas, high street regeneration where they're taking over completely derelict buildings and repurposing them for community use, solar energy on historical buildings. So all really clever, intuitive ideas, and they're all led by communities.
Now, when I looked at the site, you list lots of projects that are currently using Spacehive to crowdfund. It's quite interesting because I imagined that lots of people would be trying to raise like £100 or something, but actually it's a bit more ambitious than that. There's, I guess, £8,000, £9,000, £10,000 seems to be roughly the starting point. But is there a price range that you're allowed? Yeah. Can you try and raise £1 million on Spacehive? Can you try and raise £10 on Spacehive?
Absolutely. So we start from £500 and we go all the way up to whatever your ambition is. We are involved in what we call small but mighty projects. They're projects under £5,000 and they might be a composting area in the corner of a park that needs £3,000 to be put in place, give caddies to all of the local residents. It can be up and running in 6 weeks. This happened at a park called Greenbank Park in Liverpool. And those residents really wanted to compost their food waste, and the council didn't have a service to do it. And suddenly, within 6 weeks, they had a solution that had a really transformative effect for those residents who are then suddenly able to contribute in a more sustainable way. And the council gave them 50% of the funds. Now, the council might not have been able to make that a priority, but once they could see someone was driving it, they were absolutely able to contribute towards that. And then we go up to all sorts of large-scale projects, which are big installations, skate parks. There's an amazing one in the Cotswolds, through to things like the Camden High Line. So back in 2018, when that was first a gem of an idea, all of the feasibility study, all of the funds required for that was raised on Spacehive. And the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is one of our funders, supported that in its initial study. And obviously that's now going to go on to become one of the strongest, greatest tourist attractions in the UK. And it all started from a community idea.
In the UK and in much of Europe, especially in the UK, we have cash-stretched, cash-poor local authorities who many residents feel are stepping away from what should be their responsibilities. So, for example, the maintaining of children's parks and keeping them safe and having equipment that allows maybe children who don't live in very spacious homes to get the right amount of exercise, for example. So along comes somebody to your site. Are you agnostic on that? Or is it just the reality that these groups are stepping in to do lots of the work that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, maybe a local authority would have seen as their remit?
One of the key components to the platform is the funding ecosystem that SpaceHive has developed. So we work with local authorities, corporate businesses, housing associations, housing developers, high net worth individuals, foundations, all of whom want to support community projects and recognise the power of locally led transformation. And so within that ecosystem, which makes up around £6 million of funding at any given time, 6 to 10 million, within that funding ecosystem, we have 50 or so local authorities across the UK and Ireland that recognise the power of crowdfunding to support what their residents want, but also to enable them to support initiatives that they might not be able to prioritise otherwise. I think it's well documented that local authorities have financial constraints put upon them, and they have to make really tough decisions around what to prioritise. So it's not that they don't want to focus on those things, but there are priorities that they have to balance out. So I think the progressive councils across the UK recognise that using something like SpaceHive pushes their budget much, much further and brings in to the process of civic placemaking really ambitious local community groups and individuals that care about what's going on in the places where they live. And for councils, that element of listening to what your residents want, listening to the challenges that they experience, no one else feels it. No one else knows what it's like in the place where you live other than you. So they are inherently equipped to come up with solutions to the challenges that they are seeing. And so the councils that we work with recognise that if they listen to those communities, support them where they can financially, and they support them within their own strategic goals. So if a council is really focused on driving a net zero initiatives, they're the projects that they will say they want to focus, or they will look at the environment or high street regeneration or mental health initiatives or physical health. We do a number of programs with the NHS, and obviously that's what they want to focus on. So they support projects that align with the goals that they are focusing on anyway. And then their other big role is to platform those ideas. So once they have supported a project, and this works particularly well for businesses that have a marketing presence and a marketing budget, get behind those projects and give them the platform that they otherwise won't have. And it's worth saying that the industry average success rate in the UK for crowdfunding is 22%. On SpaceHive, that is 85%.
So that's hitting target, is it?
Hitting target. But what happens when one of our partners supports a project, that 85% jumps to 94%. And the reason is when the community and the broader public is looking at an idea and they see their local council, a brand that they recognise, an individual that's noted in the community supporting that project, gives it massive dose of confidence. So 9.5 out of 10 projects will happen when those partners, and particularly when local authorities, support those projects. So I think the councils that we work with recognise the role that they have in enabling communities to be in the driving seat of change where it is possible for them to do that.
I think that's what's so interesting about what you're doing, because it's like, I guess when David, our very good producer, suggested this idea to me, I presumed it was a site where you uploaded your need and it was a rather passive process. But you have this institutional money, this corporate money, and you're right, so you have a ticker of £6 million available at the moment. You support people in how they progress their projects, so you have this high success rate. tell me some of those things that are on there at the moment, because there must be a whoop of joy for you as well when these things kind of hit an incredible target and you know that how great to have a job that, you know, in the end affects change and makes people's lives better. Tell me a couple of things that have gone through lately that you've thought, that's good.
I have such a privileged position because I get to see these projects right at the start when they are individuals coming to us saying, I can't do this. I really want to do it, but I can't do it. We do these amazing workshops, both digital and face-to-face. And then we see this transformation not only of the places, but of the individuals that have taken part who put themselves out there. They say, I'm going to raise £50,000 and I might not have the skills to do that, but I'm going to learn. And then you see them at the end of this process where they've raised £72,000 and their chests are puffed out and you see what they can do. And when you look back at all the projects on the platform, it is this amazing barometer of the mood of the nation, because whatever we are all focused on or concerned about is reflected in those projects. So over the past few years, we have seen peaks of ideas that are around the cost of living, around the need for outdoor spaces, that are about improving access to mental health services, that are about supporting refugees, that tackle climate change in local everyday ways. So we've had some amazing environmental projects recently. A third of projects at the moment are environmental. But they not only are improving biodiversity, they are bringing people together and tackling things like loneliness and social cohesion. So there's a brilliant project in Dublin called Community Roots, and they have connected people with gardens who might not necessarily be that into gardening with the garden-less. People that really want to garden and in areas where there aren't enough allotments, and combining those two groups of people to create brilliant community events where at the same time they're creating opportunities for food growing. So they're tackling food scarcity. So it's really clever, intuitive ways of looking at that. In the Cotswolds, a group came together to put together a series of caravans which are free to use. So if you can't afford to go on holiday, you can go in and book those all year round. So it's addressing the fact that people are struggling, but that doesn't mean they don't need time away and a break. And actually, this is a group of local residents that recognise that that was the right thing to do.
You touched on something that Monocle cares about a lot as well. We often do stories about people who've enacted change in their communities and their cities, because we can all sit around waiting for someone else to do this stuff. We all see the gaps and cracks in our societies, in our neighbourhoods, in the way our cities are run. And just before we go, if people have some spare change in their pocket and they want to donate, they should go to spacehive.com is where they can find all the projects. And you encourage people to go there and see how they might help fund some of this change.
Absolutely. So you will find every sort of project imaginable. It's incredibly inspiring to see what people are doing, and you can donate as little as £2. So it's really easy to do. A couple of clicks on your phone, and you'll not only support communities that are driving really transformational change in the places where they live, but you get a little hit of feel-good factor for yourself as well. So rather than scrolling, please go and support one of our projects.
Misha Danak, CEO of Space Hive, thank you for joining me. Next up, we're off to one of the largest and most important folk festivals in Switzerland. It's an annual event with 150 market stalls and 25 rides, and it caters to everyone from families to gourmet aficionados. But what lessons does the festival, which transforms the old city centre of Olten for 4 days, teach us about the importance of bringing communities together in person? Monocle's Jessica Bridger sent us this report.
Olten, Switzerland has a remarkable old town, full of wood, stone, and plaster buildings, many decorated with painted motifs and frescoes. But that's not why we're here. We're here for the Olten Chilbi, a huge folk festival that covers the old town with tents, stalls, amusements, and rides. Oh, the rides. The town of about 20,000, once the 0 point of the Swiss national rail system, the point from which the entire rail network was surveyed, is now a center point for summer cultural celebrations. The first sign of the Chilbi is its huge Ferris wheel, its struts decked out in neon, glowing in the early twilight. It is visible from all over the city, a call to urban celebration. The Chilbi welcomes about 160,000 visitors over 4 days. 150 market stalls and 25 rides impart a carnival atmosphere. Local restaurants and guilds provide a social and traditional backbone that many country fairs would envy. The Chilbi is more than a simple pop-up amusement. It is an important part of regional life near Olten, a gathering in the last weeks of summer. While many are finishing vacations, work is not yet at full steam for autumn, and kids are about to return to school. It is a coda to the warm months. The Chilbi also thrives on Swiss tradition. The Zunft, or guilds, in Switzerland keep culture alive. The first guilds were established around the 14th century for economic and social cohesion, and they still serve a culturally cohesive purpose today and are often present at important community events. While the oldest guilds are the most famous, new guilds can always be established. And at the Olten Chilbi, the 1956 Googie Zunft, Focus Music, has a temporary outdoor restaurant, which has been a Chilbi institution since 1965. They serve Zander freshwater fish, perfectly fried in a delicate breading. The Olten Chilbi has both professional carnival fly-by-night operators and these strong local traditional organizations. The Zunft are not the only traditional operators. Another is just down the street from the Googie fish fry, in front of the Ratskeller restaurant, first built in 1673. The facade of the restaurant is remarkable. In 1905, Swiss artist Emil Kniep painted its entirety with a series of still stunning frescoes. Below these depictions of Olten's distant history, seated at large picnic tables, people tuck into what must be one of the original smash burgers, a Chilbi favorite. I'm American. We know hamburgers, and this one is purely delicious. A thin, crispy patty in a perfect, pillowy bun with just the right balance of sweet, savory condiments and some melted Swiss cheese. The culinary delights the Chilbi are as they should be, simple. Leave the truffle fries for another occasion. The city is full of gemütlich wonder at Chilbi, and the Star Flyers swing ride is perhaps the best way to have a bird's-eye view over it all. You pay your ticket at a small booth and board a swing, complete with safety belt and bar. You then slowly rise 80 meters, about half as high as Switzerland's tallest building, the Roche Tower in Basel. Reaching the top, your swing starts to spin gently around the central pole, and you make slow turns over the city. Aare River, train station, body, industry, housing, distant mountains, and the Chilbi below. From up here, it all seems so simple. Tiny people happily meandering through the city, running, swimming, dancing. Back down on the ground, it is time to try some amusements. The Chilbi amusements are mostly centered on winning large stuffed animals that someone is going to have to drag home. A particular stall emblazoned with Lucky Luke in neon, a shooting gallery with a Wild Wild West theme beckons. You're handed a Beretta pistol filled with pellets, and the objective is to shoot down 16 tin cans in a 4x4 grid. You surprise even yourself, and especially the stall operator, by neatly dispatching each can on the first shot. A giant bell is rung, signaling a perfect round. Hidden talent indeed. You hand the giant stuffed dog prize to your partner. Mission accomplished. As always, we need to reflect on what value these temporary events have in cities, and today our focus is on something that we perhaps take too much for granted: security, safety, and the social cohesion that allows pleasant urban coexistence. From the small country fair to the enormous Christmas market, from the sprawling souk to the downtown farmers market, These events depend on the ability of the public to remain civilized and embark on a common use of public space in crowded conditions. While sadly public safety measures, such as limiting car and truck access to event venues, are now required, true safety lies in numbers, the thousands of people who can go along to get along, all in the name of some urban fun. These events are transformative, important moments of gathering in the social life of cities and regions. As more of life unfolds online, these moments where people want to be out in the world, in a specific public space, at a specific time for a special event, together with thousands of strangers, are extremely valuable. We should be mindful of and thankful for our collective ability to achieve simple urban coexistence, to co-create, build, and invent urban spectacles. This keeps events like the Olten Chilbi alive and vibrant around the world. For Monocle in Olten, Switzerland, I'm Jessica Bridger.
Have you ever landed in a city for the first time, disembarked your plane, and found that the terminal leaves you feeling like you could be anywhere in the world? That's the problem that architects Perkins and Will are aiming to combat by creating a new toolkit of parts that looks to foster a more bespoke airport experience. They're hoping to prove this toolkit's efficacy in the upcoming New Terminal 1 at JFK, where Perkins and Will's New York studio is responsible for designing the entire retail experience. I was joined recently by Mariana Giraldo, a strategist at Perkins and Will, who explored some of the ways that designers can achieve a more personalised and place-appropriate experience when planning a terminal. I began by asking Mariana what is contained in their airport toolkit.
When you think of toolkit, that can really mean a lot of things. But as you mentioned, our work really focuses on retail. And, guidelines for retail typically cover the basics. They look at height, finishes, storefront treatments, things of that sort of how retail should live inside a terminal. And typically, toolkits lean very heavily on control, right? On setting sort of very clear rules to make sure things start to feel uniform and in a way predictable. But what's made this work with the toolkit interesting, at least from my perspective, is this idea of creating a framework that allows retailers to tell a very authentic New York story. So in many ways, it is a shift because instead of prescribing exactly how a space should look, the toolkit starts to create a series of storylines, layers, and cues that give retailers enough direction to really feel connected to the city of New York and leave a lot of room for creativity, right? Like in the same way that retail grows and starts to live in a streetscape, we're trying to create that environment for that type of life to come into the terminal.
So tell us some of the physical things you've had to put in place to make that happen. I understand there's more greenery, for example, to evoke the parks of New York. Tell us some of the things that you've interjected into the project.
I think, for the most part, the toolkit is built around a series of stories. You can think of it almost like neighborhoods or sort of districts within the terminal. And one of the very specific asks from the Port Authority is to tell the story of New York at different scales, right? When you're thinking about New York, it's not just Manhattan. It also has to do with upstate New York and the beautiful landscape. If you haven't been, I highly recommend it, but the beautiful landscape of upstate New York and its autumn trees, and there's beautiful sort of color. So how do you start to layer in experiences that might not be, let's say, as typical as you would think of when coming to New York, and also starting to dive into the very specifics of some of the boroughs like Queens specifically, because this is where the JFK terminal is located. So, landscape, the ability to feel surprised as you were walking through the terminal, the idea of art becoming an integral part, not just an added layer, but art is such an important component of New York, right? And all of the cultural expressions of a very diverse community. So these are some of the things that are included in the toolkit, again, more as hints and cues of the type of layers that should be included in the design of retail. which of course is going to be done at an individual level, right? We're not really talking here about the ability to control or influence every single space that's going to be leased, but how can you add in a little bit more interest for this very specific project?
What was the perceived problem that you're trying to fix here? You know, as an outsider, somebody who's been through JFK many times and with various airlines, it's never been the most exciting of experiences. And certainly when you compare it sometimes to the airports you go through, for example, in Asia or in the Middle East, the retail has been, I think it would be fair to say, a little bit underwhelming in the past and hardly likely to slow your passage through the terminal. Is that the perception that the Port Authority, the retailers, the operators who run these concessions were saying to you, okay, we need to do something to up our game here?
Absolutely. I think, to your point, there are great examples of how airport design has been changing over the years. But the truth is that, in many cases, what we see in airports is that they often feel like nowhere, right? They start to feel very generic. And when you're coming in, you could be in New York or in Sao Paulo, or at the end of the day, it starts to have, an aesthetic where you might be staring at the same duty-free cosmetics, the same sort of coffee chain, the same finishes. And in many ways, I think this happens because airports tend to be designed for efficiency, right? For control and for repetition, which makes total sense, especially in a terminal like JFK when you're moving millions of people through a very secure environment. But in many cases, when you're chasing that order all the time and that sense of control, airports often kill vibrancy. So the irony, well, at least the irony for me all this time was, we as architects love, in a way, to talk about the magic of vibrant streetscapes, right? This mix of storefronts, the sort of patina that comes with time and these unexpected encounters. Yet in airports, which have a very urban scale, we default to exact the opposite, which is total control. So in a way, our design challenge here is how can we not design out the mess? And in a way, how do we make sure we're not designing out the life? And the toolkit is a bit of an attempt to resist that sort of impulse or that need. It doesn't mean that we're handing over chaos, right? We understand that airports can't be chaos, but we do try to channel that New York energy, which is very distinct, without over-defining the aesthetics. So I guess it's a question which it's constant in our work, is how do we design for the uncontrollable, making sure that you end up with something that is cohesive, but that does, create something filled with soul, filled with something that you want to come over and there's a sense of life in it.
What are the challenges? And I'm not asking you to say anything tricky here, but I presume that it's like anybody. You can create the perfect environment, you can put in the infrastructure, you can have best intentions, but in the end, this is all about partnerships, isn't it? Because you need then them to recruit the right retailers who see these spaces and think, I know what I can do. You need some other partners in the mix who pick up the challenges and opportunities that you're presenting. How have you managed to bring together all the interested parties to say, look, this is great. We can offer you this kind of less controlled canvas, these opportunities for change to reflect the diversity and the buzz of New York. But, we have to think about who's going to take over these spaces and make sure that they're not just selling us more neck pillows.
Well, first of all, we've had great partners, and I would say, it really starts with the Port Authority and this genuine interest to tell a local story. And when I say a local story, this really strong focus on also elevating the Queens community, I think has been really inspiring to see, that we're not leaving behind the folks who are adjacent to this building that, in a way, can be very challenging, right? Like living very close to an airport isn't necessarily, everyone's dream. But in any case, I think the Port Authority has helped us start that conversation. Same with our partners at URW. They understand that having a very strong narrative behind the retail offering is key, both for how they're going to attract new tenants, but also to make sure that people are actually stopping by the retail and really encouraging sales. So I think it's everyone understands the benefits of trying to create something that is unique. I think the challenge starts to come with understanding just the nuances of the market and starting to understand how do you get smaller tenants, smaller vendors to come into the airport, to be able to be sustainable over time. And one of the things that we keep trying to push for is how can we create some areas that don't require that much of an investment from the retailers, right? If you think about pop-up experience and things of that sort, where that's where you can really start to bring in some of that local flavor and some of those unexpected encounters, you're going to need to somehow ensure that the infrastructure can support them too, right? Without having all these massive builds and a lot of money spent on putting on a show, if you will. So it's still in process, right? The terminal hasn't opened yet, but I think we always go back. What has been really interesting about all of these conversations and visioning sessions is that every design decision that is made by the individual brands comes back to, okay, how is this contributing to the story that we want to tell? And so it does help create some sort of a thread.
This toolkit is obviously going to be most pertinent at the moment to this project here at JFK. But is this something that you think you could take to other airports, to other partners in the US and beyond, and say, look, we have something here which, yes, it reflected New York when we did it there, but perhaps this could represent your city and your neighborhood as you try to bring this to life?
Absolutely. And obviously, this is just one piece of the puzzle. But as airport design really becomes more holistic and you're starting to see, beautiful light come in and mass timber and even these quiet moments of pause and reflection, we really do believe that there needs to be some master plan around what we want the retail experience to be. And in many ways, the same principles that make a city great should apply to an airport, right? This idea of layering in public spaces that invite you to gather, to pause, the mix of cultures. This idea that you have to, in a way, plan for these things to happen organically. So yes, this toolkit is based on the experience of New York, which has its own complicated stories because of its global nature and its sort of hyper-local context. But I believe that is probably true with all cities, right? Every city has a million stories to tell. And we think that through retail, we can start to layer in something that is more filled with smaller stories, right? That is not unidimensional. And so, yeah, we see a lot of opportunity with this approach and with this understanding of retail sort of power in bringing people together.
Mariana Giraldo from Perkins and Will there, and my thanks to her. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. You can follow us for new editions of the show every week, and you can subscribe to Monocle magazine for reports on all things design, architecture and urbanism too. Just visit monocle.com. The Urbanist is produced by Carlotta Ribello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, city lovers.
On The Urbanist, we're always asking what makes a city truly livable. This September, find some answers in Barcelona as Monocle hosts its annual Quality of Life conference. 3 days of panels, ideas and good conversation with global mayors, architects and policy pioneers, all over good food and a glass of something local. Find out more and book your seat at monocle.com/conference.